Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Veterans Forum. My name is Bob Stevens. I have the pleasure of hosting this program. We're coming to you from the studios of the Bedford Community Television here in Bedford, New Hampshire. Today is the 12th of March, 2015. Time sure goes by. For those of you who do not understand or have not seen the program, we're doing this in conjunction with the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project, wherein they have asked stations such as this throughout the country if they can and will make their facilities available to any and all veterans, male and female, who served in any war from World War II, Vietnam, Korea, Desert Storm on. If they can and will, come and share those experiences in a televised interview. The program will then be fed into the database of the Library of Congress, and from there on out, anybody who is concerned or would like to find out who and what you are and what you did has that access to it. I'm also finding out, though, and this is a bit morbid, but it's true. A lot of the guys, particularly the older fellows, have said that this is perhaps one of the best legacies they can leave their family. We're recording history as it was made by the people who made that history, without any changes, alterations, or embellishments. If you can and will, come and share your experiences here with us too. The address will be on the back of the program, stereo and so forth, so that we'll make you feel welcome. But more important, from all of the interviews I've done now, I've got better than 110, I think, in the can, as they say. Most of the guys and the few gals at the end, for some reason, said, you know, thank you, Bob. I'm glad to get rid of that. I've been carrying that for a long time. I haven't shared it with many people or very few people. So it is a good cathartic, if you will, and it's priceless, but it won't cost you a dime, okay? And everybody is welcome. Before we start the program, though, I got this about 3 months ago. I want to share it with you every prayer I can. It's a magic serial number, if you will, 211. It's a telephone system throughout the state of New Hampshire, where any guy and gal, veteran, or some of their friends, if they feel they can help, who are in need of any kind, dial that number, 211, and you'll be put in touch with this cadre of people and facilities to help you in any way they can. The bottom line, it's yours to use if you need it, and please do not be bashful. Now today we're having a rather turnabout because the fellow that's going to be doing the work, if you will, here, Bill, owns the place, and we've been chasing him for a long time to have him, if you will, share his experiences. Without any further ado, Bill, I'll ask you to introduce yourself, where you now live, your branch of service and service dates, and let's have some fun.
I agree. Let's have some fun. And I know it's taken a while for you to get me on the show. I'm used to being behind the cameras, helping you out with this fantastic program. So to answer your question, my name's Bill Jennings. And
tell the last name for the record.
Jennings.
Thank you.
William Vincent, Jr.
Period.
As we used to say in the military and still do. I was in the United States Army with the Army Security Agency from 1969 to 1973, 4 years of active duty. So I am a Vietnam-era veteran. I also did 11 years of reserve duty with the 505th ASA, Army Security Agency, which was a electronic warfare company based out of Fort Devens.
Oh, the guys are flying up at ASA, or is that some other branch? Because
well, you know, when we get,
shouldn't I ask?
Yeah, when we get further into it's because I know how you lay out your program. I can give you a little more details because we were, you know, certainly combat ready, both in a strategic situation at my stay at Fort Devens, and then later as a reserve unit working out of Drum and out of some of our Florida locations. We were actually working some live missions.
Good.
Yep.
What I'd like to do is, if we will, to get the picture out of the way,
yes,
as you call it. With all due respect, this is the young fellow as he used to look a few weeks ago. There have been some changes, but the idea is still there. He's here to help and to serve his country, and he's done a damn good job. How's that for a build-up?
That is wonderful.
Okay. We owe each other a beer.
We do. We do.
Okay. Now, seriously, for a moment anyway. Mm-hmm. Now that we know who you are, let's go back and find out how you come to be. For example, If you can, go back and tell us where and when you were born, and how was your life in your early stages with brothers and sisters, and what you did to keep out of trouble.
Sure. And a lot of people that watch this will be don't know exactly what my age is, so this is all coming out right now. I was born.
Don't shoot me if you...
No. I was born in Quincy, Massachusetts, January 13th, 1948. And grew up in an Irish household of, including myself, 5 kids. Both very Irish parents. Started out in West Quincy, very tight quarters. My dad was a World War II veteran, and the housing that we had in Quincy at the time was veteran housing. And as a matter of fact, as my kids were growing up, and certainly they were growing up in a much better kind of environment than I initially started growing up in, we'd still go by that project area, and I'd point out to them, and I'd say, see, that's where I grew up. And they'd say, well, it looks pretty big, Dad. You know, it's like a colonial house. I said, no, the difference is there were 4 families in that one house.
Amen.
But it was a beautiful lifetime for my first 10 years on this earth, because all the guys in that area were World War II vets, and just making that transition, and still in 48, 49, 50, 51, etc. So there was a close identity and a closeness amongst all the families. So sometimes there's a big plus with families living close to one another, and friends living close to one another. Everybody becomes one big happy family. So it was a great neighborhood to grow up in. As my dad to continue to move on in life, you know, in terms of putting a few more dollars in his pocket, he then took us to, and you probably remember this, as the housing industry was booming in the mid-50s in developments. You know, all the houses, ranch houses. Yeah, cookie cutters, you're absolutely right. And farmland was being taken over, and that's where all these cookie cutter homes went. And Dad surprised us all one day by saying, well, we're moving out of the closet and we're moving to Holbrook, Massachusetts, which literally, for me, being in a project environment, was, oh my God, this is unbelievable. There was some farm country out there, and you know, even though houses were pretty much on top of one another, it was like, oh my God, we've got our own house. I don't have to listen to somebody in the next, you know, apartment.
Yeah.
And literally, my parents had to make the move because my 2 sisters and I were sleeping in the same room. It was only 2 bedrooms. And so my sister Claire, when she was, you know, she's about 8 years older than I am. If she knows, she'd hate me for that. She's about 4. She was getting into those teenage years, and they said, you know, we got to do something. Yeah. We got to move. So I thank her for getting me to the country, because it was her age that motivated my parents to make the move. And then about 10 years later, my brother came along, so there was a gap, and then my sister, you know, 6 years later, came along as well. So we have a first family, and as you would have it, you know, my sister is like 3 to 4 years older than I am, and then there's Irish twins. My sister really is, for those that don't know, Irish twins are 14 months apart in age.
Oh.
And then then the second family came along. And then eventually, after, I can remember my freshman year in high school in Holbrook, my dad then, again, continuing to advance, we moved down the street to Braintree, where we got into that much bigger home, and life became good. And not that it wasn't great before, it was absolutely super.
Now, did you have any trouble, though, readjusting or transitioning from, as you said, the first to the second to the third house, as far as going into new schools, new environments, new friends? Did you have any trouble making those new changes?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. You know, when you're younger, I think we moved when I was just about to turn 10 to Holbrook, and there was a lot of young kids. Again, that same kind of environment where, you know, the World War II veterans, you know, are starting to move, and everybody seemed to have kids the same age. We were all kind of moving along together. But as you get older, you know, and I think I was going into the 3rd or 4th grade in Holbrook. And I was, in my freshman year, I was playing football, you know, we grew up together, all my friends, and Holbrook was a small town, and then my dad says, hey, we're moving to Braintree, and I was going, you gotta be kidding me. In those days, parents didn't really think twice about, oh, are we gonna upset the kids if we moved? It was like, you're tough. You either are coming or you're not going anywhere.
we went through the same thing, but the idea was you had a job, and if you didn't accept that job, kaput.
That's exactly it.
Today the kids can tell you, hey, stuff it, I'm staying here and you're going to take care of me.
That's right.
We didn't have that license. I didn't know we had it licensing.
Yeah, you know,
it's your nickel.
Yeah, but so that was just a little bit of an adjustment, you know, going into Braintree High School where there were 2 junior highs. It was a big, big town. You're coming from a smaller country town in Braintree with the city of Braintree, and you had East Junior High and South Junior High, and they all knew one another, and I was the new kid in the block. What helped me is I played sports. And so I was actually, before I even went to school there, they stopped football practice early. And so I was out there hitting heads and, you know, got to know some of the guys. So when school started 2 weeks later, I knew some of the, I knew some of the football players, et cetera. But it was still an adjustment. And I will say I spent 3 years there, you know, playing football and playing baseball. You know, had friends, but not really totally connected to the point like I see some other people that might have grown up in a community. You know, it was still a great time, but the connection to Braintree was short-lived because then I was off to college, and college was still staying in Braintree. You know, we had money, but we didn't have a lot of money, if you know what I mean by that. So trying to get in some of the bigger universities at the time was like, okay, what's the best way to save money? So I went to Mass Bay Community College for 2 years, you know, driving back and forth with 3 or 4 other people into Watertown. Saved a lot of money, and then ended up, after I got my associate's degree, going to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst.
No, excuse me, but when you went to UMass, did you join ROTC? Or was that?
Nope.
I'm jumping the gun, but I'm trying to.
No, yep, nope. I'll take you right to it. Yeah, and I'll get you in the middle. No, I didn't, but I'll tell you after. I'll tell you that experience. I mean, there were ROTC guides down there, but I didn't. You know, I was transferring in as a junior, and so I was just getting acclimated to the whole environment. I was a history major, political science minor, and my whole aspiration at that time was to become a teacher. So this is getting to the military part of it. As you well know, Vietnam was hot and heavy, and because I was up at UMass at the time when the Tet Offensive took place, there was a lot of things going on. You know, you had the Bobby Kennedy assassination, you had the Martin Luther King assassination, you had the Tet Offensive. You know, the whole war situation was changing. And University of Massachusetts was kind of a radical, and if you remember the Students for Democratic Society, SDS, they were pretty active at that time, you know, with the Abby Hoffmans of the world, et cetera, opposing the war and bringing to the attention, and the media was getting stronger, that what are we doing? We're losing a lot of people over there, and for what reason? So as a student at the University of Massachusetts, I, you know, never belonged to SDS, but we were all kind of caught up in that because we were all facing a draft. And the draft, as you know, during those days is completely different from what it became and where it is nowadays. We don't have a draft. So I can remember going home in my more radical thinking one time, and in my hair, when I had a lot of hair, I had grown it out and all that sort of stuff. And to show you how my old man was, a very Irish guy, I came home, he wouldn't let me in the house.
Really?
He said, you're not getting allowed. My sisters to this day remember that. He said, you don't come into this house. That was my junior year in college, unless you get a haircut. My mother's behind him, oh, Bill, let him in the house because I'm a junior.
You have an afro?
And he goes, no, yeah, it was out there. And so, so I got the haircut, obviously, and you know, and I was able to get into the house. And I didn't come home to see my parents. I had a girlfriend at the time. It's like, hey, I'm just dropping by. No, I'm going to say hello. But the funny thing about it is, about a year later, in my senior year, and for those that aren't aware, there were different types of deferments. There was 2S and 1A. 2S is a student deferment. And then Uncle Sam got very wise to the fact that, hey, everybody's trying to defer their obligation to serve in the military and avoid the draft by, okay, finished my undergraduate work, now I'm going to go and do my master's work. And that's what I had every intention of doing. Until Uncle Sam in 1969 says, no more deferments for master's degree, unless you are, you know, PhD doctors or something along those lines. So I ended up going back to, I went down to the recruiting station before I graduated from UMass, just before I graduated in May of 1969, and said, okay, here's my selective service number. And with glee, the recruiter looked at me, so we got you in August. I mean, he was laughing, oh yeah, we got you.
We had live on Daddy.
Yeah, oh yeah, and they were, and everybody was being drafted at the time. I mean, and if you think about it, and nobody here, you know, the young people today have no concept of what a draft is. And you know, a draft is, I don't care what your plans are, where you think you're going, what kind of job you might have, you will be spending a minimum 2 years in the United States Army. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how do I get control of that? So they had what was known as a delayed entry program, which meant, and you remember this probably, the Boston Army base. You could go down there where you can take your test, etc. The delayed entry program for officers candidate school. And essentially what that meant is that I could defer my active duty for 6 months. And I said, why not? I want to make some money. And of course I was dating an Irish girl. We were both 21, so back then, what do you do when you've been going out with a girl for a long time? She basically said, we're getting married, and now it's like, okay.
Yeah, duh.
I know.
And it hasn't changed.
No, well, yeah, you know, nowadays. So I signed up for the United States Army with an active report date of 4 December 1973.
Excuse me, but at that time of sign-up, did you in effect have a contract that you were going to spend
Yes.
in a specific branch? You knew what you wanted to do?
Yes, I knew that I was going to the Army,
option,
but I
yeah.
was, and I knew at the time there wasn't a specific MOS that I was assigned to. It wasn't that you're in the Army, they can, infantrymen, mortarman, whatever it might have been, you know. They put you through all the testing, but I took my test for Officers Candidate School, passed that to get into the program. And officer candidates, you know, well, I'll just finish up by saying, so we rushed a lot of things. Graduated in May of '69. I will add that the 3 people I still remember that spoke at our graduation, and they talked about the war at the time. And the war was just as active in '69 as it was in, you know, '68 and '67. Yeah, things were changing, but there was more focus. 3 people spoke at the UMass graduation in Amherst, and it was Ted Kennedy Jr., Archibald McLeish, and Walter Cronkite. And it was, I still remember to this day, and I still have pictures. And, you know, when you had 3,000 students graduating and it was a great day, it was super. I will tell you, though, graduating from college was probably a sad day for me because I really enjoyed college, but I also knew what I was getting into. And I'll tie it back into what my dad had to tell me in my junior year, which I left out. When I told him that I didn't want to go in the service, this is my junior year in college, he got so mad at me and said to me, it is your obligation. I remember, World War II veteran. He didn't fully understand the war at the time. And I was just trying to be that, you know, that radical guy that said, you know, no, I'm not going to have anything to do with this war. And I can remember, he was really upset. He apologized the next day, and then we moved on. When I came back in my junior and my senior year, we're talking a year later, as the war was changing in terms of its definition, and people saying, what is the purpose?
What's it all about?
I said, hey, Dad, I just want to let you know, I signed up for the Officer Candidate Program. I'm going to be going active duty. Notice first reply to me, is there any way you can get out of it? That's how much he changed. Said, Dad. And I had changed my own way of thinking. I said, Dad, I want to do this. Yeah. And you do change in terms of your thinking. I knew it was an opportunity to become an officer, that it would open up some opportunity and at the same time serve. So got married in November and went active duty in 4 December, and my military career began by going down to the Boston Army base and getting ready to be shipped out.
What year?
That was December of 1969.
Okay, I'm trying to get some chronology.
Yep, like December 1969. Funny story. The day that we were shipping out to Fort Dix, I can remember standing in line. We got our last physicals, and you know how those physicals go. Don't forget to cough. And
New Ross.
Yeah, I know. So they had us all lined up. I can still remember it to this day. And you know, and you had your drill sergeants from the Army, and then in comes these 2 stern, you know, that Smokey the Bear hat, 2 Marine drill sergeants. And I said, all right, gunny sergeants
Okay.
for the Marines. And I was in there saying, all right, everybody here that is already signed up for a service branch, step forward. Those have not signed up and are here because you've been drafted, stay in line. So I marched forward. They said, all right, you everybody over here. There are probably about 6 or 7 people there. Gunny sergeants walked down. They go, you, and you. You're now Marines. 2 of those guys started crying. No way! I mean, I'm laughing my butt off.
Call my father.
And he goes, I'm going to call my lawyer. I still remember that. They said, you do that.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, they ended up Marines. But I had the utmost respect for Marines. And in retrospect, maybe that's the branch I should have headed into because I became a very gung-ho Army guy.
Doesn't hurt.
So hopping on that bus, and then at that time it was 8-9 weeks of basic training. When I was at Fort Dix, New Jersey, they found out after about a week, they knew that I was going to OCS, but there was a lot of guys in OCS that were part of, and we were mixed in with everybody. That was my first exposure, and that's one thing I liked about the military. My exposure to meeting people from around the country.
Amen.
I'm telling you, I met a lot of Southern boys down there, and I still say to this day that Mississippi and South Carolina boys they have the hardest Southern accents. Some of those guys became my real good friends. I must have impressed them somehow because the drill sergeant, and in a company you have 800 men. Everything's in four squads, four companies. Yeah. So. I must have impressed them because for each company they had, what they call a trainee squad leader. They had a trainee company, leader, which were troops like myself, because I wanted to see people's command structure. And they asked me to be the trainee field first, which meant I was the first sergeant for 800 of the troops.
How long were you in the service?
Well, they
spent a couple of weeks.
Yeah, maybe a couple of weeks at that, maybe a week and a half. And I was a gung-ho guy, without being a pain in the ass. Somehow it was just going about my business. It was like, if this is where I'm here, I'm going to show them that I'm going to be the best.
Absolutely.
And all of a sudden they came up to me and I went, and it wasn't like we're going to. They surprised the heck out of me. And they said, they didn't qualify it. I still remember, we understand you're going to OCS. We're going to put you in this because we think this would help you. It was just like, hey, we've been watching you. Okay. Yeah. That was a memorable experience. Gave me a lot of great leadership training. Worked with the real field first, the drill sergeants for each company. And they were hard on us. I mean, a lot of college guys that were drafted that were part of it. So, and then that mix of some of those kids that hadn't even made it out of high school or just barely made it out.
They were on merit.
So yeah, so there were some challenges, but we made it through, and then we graduated after 9 weeks, and then I began my other stint as an enlisted guy by being shipped out to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Where I was trained to build bridges and blow them up. I was a combat engineer.
Combat engineer.
I was a combat engineer.
There's something I liked about
I know, you being a CB guy. So I was there for 9 weeks and earned my PV2 stripe, just it's not a private first class, it's just that you're a private, it's a single. And actually I got that coming out of Fort Dix, now that I think of it. When I got to Fort Leonard Wood, then I became a private first class. And there I decided to take the opposite approach, knowing that I was going to go 6 months of infantry school at Benning after this tour. So I didn't volunteer or get involved with any of the leadership programs like I had been with in my initial experience at Fort Dix. I thought, okay, let's other guys do that.
Was there any repercussion for that decision?
No, not at all. It was just, they knew where I had come from, and it was just another opportunity for other guys to experience that. And I was able to relax a little bit, somewhat, but, everybody is still, heads down and making sure you're listening to your drill sergeants, your company commanders. When you go to Advanced Individual Training, AIT, they're treating you more like a soldier. and not just as a trainee like you do in your first 8 to 9 weeks down in at basic training. And again, Dick's was basic training. Now I'm in advanced individual training, and I did that. Gosh, up until May of 1970. So I, trying to follow the timeline.
Okay.
So we were then transferring stations. We all got our orders, and some of my buddies were heading to Fort Lewis, Washington, I should say, after my basic to go infantry. The combat engineer guys were getting their orders for Vietnam. They were headed over, and a number of us were going to Fort Benning, Georgia. So we were transferring station. We were advised strongly by our company commanders. We had to travel in uniform at the time because we were active duty, but there was such a backlash on military personnel that they were briefed us on not to get into any confrontations when traveling to new station.
In uniform?
In uniform.
Oh.
So I can still remember being in the St. Louis airport with my buddies. And at the time, the expression was hippies, long-haired, whatever. People demonstrating what they thought, and their right, freedom of speech. So here we're fighting for
to give them that right.
Give them that right.
Yeah.
And we had them come right up in our face calling us baby killers. You should be ashamed wearing that uniform, etc. We didn't say anything. One of my buddies came real close and said, "It's not worth it." I will always remember that the general disrespect. Why are you wearing that uniform? You should be ashamed of yourself. We didn't say anything. We couldn't say anything.
No.
Did it suck? Did I want to do something?
Oh yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I wear that. I keep that as a memory, but I still remember that, and I think of it as with my friends and I not saying anything, and I think of that very proudly, that we were able to maybe cause more frustration on their part.
Oh, yeah.
That we didn't respond.
Like the bit of putting a rose stem down a rifle barrel.
Yeah.
More than once I wanted to say, "Gee, you shouldn't have done that."
Yeah.
But
so now we're heading to Fort Benning, Georgia, and in the meantime, while I forgot to tell you about early, I think it was, in fact, it was just before I went from Fort Dix to Fort Leonard Wood that my wife at the time announced that she was pregnant. So I did have 3 days between Fort Dix and Fort Benning where I spent some time with her, and she, when I did see her at that time, I think she was like 2.5 or 3 months pregnant, which is an interesting story because the next time I saw her, I'd already gone through Fort Leonard Wood and then through Fort Benning. And so the next time I saw her, my daughter was like 2 months old. So I saw her when she was 2.5 months pregnant, and then the next time I saw her, my daughter was 7 or 8 weeks.
How'd you feel when you held it the first time?
Weird. It was different. It was like, wow. Well, I had just basically turned 22, and of course the big thing is not making any money at the time. I said, how am I going to support a family? But I knew I was,
Were they still living in Braintree? Or
they were living in Braintree. She was living with her parents, and which was great. And in fact, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but I'll finish that part of the story. While I was at Fort Benning, the company commander called me down, and he said, "Jennings, get down here quick." And I went down, and then, you're standing there, and he just said, "Hey, just want to let you know, congratulations. You are a proud parent of a baby girl." I said, "Thank you very much." I'm standing at the position of attention. He wouldn't let me stand at the Eddie's position. I'm still, because this is OCS. And he said, "I'll give you an opportunity right now. Someone's on the phone." It was my mother-in-law at the time, and I spoke to her, and she told me, and I said, "That's absolutely fantastic. How's Maureen doing, etc.?" And she said, "Fine, and baby's doing well, etc."
Great.
Hung up, and company commander shook my hand and said, "Congratulations, and I'll get back."
Yeah.
You're like, boom, just keep you inside.
I've gone through the manual, get back.
Yeah, that's basically it.
Yeah.
So, I ended up in May of 1970 going to Fort Benning, Georgia. So now we're into May of 70, as I said. And that time now, the war is really starting to downsize, and to some degree because of the pressure from back home. So there's 3 levels of candidacy. You're a mud dog, or your first 8 weeks in the program. It's a 21-week program, not to be confused with some people that used to go through it in 90 days.
90
or the National Guard
yeah.
would have OCS on weekends, and then they do 2-week drills. And this was 6 months infantry. And so guys were either coming out of the field as enlisted guys with MOS as infantry guys or whatever and being recognized and, hey, we'd like to become an officer. Or they were grunts like me going through basic AIT, then going through the OCS program. And when I was going through training down there and I saw those ROTC guys down there for their 4 weeks of training, don't you think I hadn't thought, why didn't I go through ROTC?
Hindsight's great.
Oh, yeah. But so 8 weeks, and then there you become an intermediate candidate where you can wear black under your OCS brass. And then the last 6 weeks of the program, or 8 weeks, I should say, you become blue, where you are treated as an officer and you become part of the training program for new candidates that are coming into the program. Yeah. But a very, very interesting thing happened just around my 14th week. Fort Benning, Georgia had 3 brigades. 3 brigades. Now, do you remember what I said to you earlier about how the Army works in blocks of 4? Mm-hmm. So a company is made up of 4 platoons, okay? A platoon is made, I'll start it this way. A platoon has 4 squads, all right? And 4 squads are in a company of 800 men. 4 companies make up a battalion. Okay, so think about it that way. So how many men do you have in a, so you have, I want to make sure I have my math correctly here. So 200 men, so we have 4, 4, and 4. And you work the numbers. The bottom line is you've got a lot of people. So in a brigade, you've got, 5,000 people, easily, candidates going through the program. And what happened is the Army came down and said, we no longer need second lieutenants in infantry. So what they ended up doing, Al, was, I'm sorry, Bob, they ended up coming down and saying, anybody that wants to get out of the OCS program can get out without going to Vietnam, and you can go anywhere in the world, and you'll come out at a higher rank. Pretty inviting, huh?
Yeah,
I went into OCS as a Spec 4. I got promoted again. I could have come out as an E5 straight up and gone anywhere in the world. And all my buddies were, that I'd even gone through basic and AIT with, were ready to hop out. I called up thinking I was going to do it, and I was talking to my parents, and I said, I still have to think about it. I really wanted to become an officer, and I'd already gone 14 or 15 weeks through the program, and I was so close. But I'm thinking, no Vietnam, I'm married, and I got a daughter.
Yeah.
What do you do? Whether it was self-serving or selfish, I don't look at it that way. I still felt this is going to provide an opportunity. I'm married, I have a child, I need money.
I need to be around.
And I love the fact, because of the leadership skills that I picked up, that this can continue to help me. Toughest decision I ever made. Called my parents, called my wife at the time, and told them, and they weren't happy. I explained my reasoning. I ended up telling my buddies who were bailing left and right, and they were yelling at me. I had one of my closest friends who didn't talk to me ever again.
You opted to stay in.
I opted to stay in. Yeah. And as it turned out, we went from 3 brigades, ready for this, to 1 battalion. Remember, you had 4 battalions make up a brigade.
Abandoned ship?
Everybody, because it was the best thing since sliced bread. We're not going to Vietnam. We'll go out as a higher rank. I can go anywhere in the world, etc. So those that remained, so we went from 1 battalion, and usually you have 4 companies, right? We only had 2 companies in 1 battalion. You do the numbers, thousands left.
That's what I was going to ask, the dropout
Yeah,
rate.
so basically you have roughly, so you have, 200, 400, maybe about 600 guys left out of thousands. It was unheard of. Mm-hmm. Why I didn't take it? again, I still had an obligation. I still felt that it would better my life,
Yeah,
you know, and I would take my
it's
chances.
a conscious decision.
It was a very conscious decision. As it turned out, when we all graduated, it was absolutely amazing. None of us went into the infantry. They didn't need infantry positions. That's how it became MI. I was military intelligence, Army Security Agency. The only guys that ended up in infantry were 3 guys that ended up in the color guard down in Washington, D.C. And 1 guy went into armor. And other people went other places, you know.
Did you say color guard?
Yes. Yeah. We're talking about the guys that ended up, you know, with the caissons, you know, all those soldiers, you know, that do the, you know, that march in front of the unknown soldier, and, you know, the pomp and circumstances.
That was the old Third Army.
Yeah, yeah. So they were going down there, and and there were other MOSs or other branches that they, you know, they ended up in. But infantry was not part of the equation at that time. But here we all were infantry trained. I mean, I worked with you know, when I was in there, I did a lot of field work. We worked, you know, flying into LZs. We prepared for Vietnam. We trained and, you know, to move into villages. I mean, you know, being dropped in the middle of nowhere, you know, reading those contour maps. Where are you now with your guys looking up, calling in artillery, calling in mortars. I mean, we were all prepared. We were there, you know, to go infantry and to start taking our platoons as infantry platoon leaders, and we're all proud of it. And it was something that I was ready to do. We all looked at going Ranger, you know, you're really gung-ho, and didn't go that route. I came that close, but, you know, I had my wife coming down, and she was a little nervous about that, so I didn't go that route. So by signing up and getting into military intelligence, and they allowed also those that stayed as officers to pick our choice of station. And I picked Fort Devens. And as an MI officer, that's where the Army Security Agency was, and that's where I ended up. And that was where the ASA school was. And what I was doing there, that's Army Security Agency, we were the people that were intercept operators, 05Hs, which is an MOS for manual Morse operators, that would intercept all the ditty-bops that were out there, you know, you know, and we would train people on how to take those dots and dashes and, you know, convert them to letters. That information would then get to the intelligence community, the S2 at the battalion level, then G2 at a higher division level, and brigade level, etc. My responsibility is working with traffic analysts. So we would take that information that we would receive, and our job, working also with voice intercept operators, which were 98Gs, they would, 98 Bravos, I believe. The MOS is straight. It doesn't make any difference. We would all take, whether it be voice intercept, Morse intercept, take it, and when you are trying to create an offense and your commander is trying to come up with a battle plan, he certainly wants to know the size and scope and where the opposing forces are. And that was our job, to try to intercept information to create the picture of what's happening across the river or what's happening in different areas and zones. We would also, you know, certainly work with Air Force Security Services, Naval Security Group, and of course, ultimately we all reported to NSA. And I had, in my capacity, a TSSI clearance, which is top secret special intelligence. And when you're scrutinized and you're looked at 20 different ways, and when you're part of the NSA, which our whole organization was, you better be squeaky clean. And fortunately, I have to thank my dad, and I never drank when I was in high school. College, things change around, but one thing I tried to do is always keep my nose clean. And that's the most important thing, is kids nowadays, got to be careful making those early mistakes, you know. Nose clean, mouth shut. Oh, yeah. So that being said, you know, I did that for 2 years. I knew I was going to be at station at Fort Devens, and it was huge at the time.
Now, were you then commissioned? And
I'm commissioned, thank you, yeah. You know, I'm already commissioned, yeah, and I forgot to add that. So October of 1970, we graduated from OCS, became the Butter Bar. And then I drove from Fort Benning with the family. Actually put her on a plane and the baby, and then I drove to Fort Devens. We got a place there, and then she lived with me for while I was there. And in October of 1972, because when I did get Devens, I had to volunteer, what they called volunteer indefinitely, which means I had to add another tour of my duty. They say, okay, you got your station, okay, but we're going to get you that last year. And then it happened. In October of 1972, I got my orders for Vietnam. And it still hits you. You're prepared for it. It's like, wow, I'm going to Phu Bai, which is up by Hue. And this is October of 1972. And there was a lot of action going on up there. And because we knew, because even though you're at Fort Devens, a lot of people don't know, and of course there's concertina wire and everything around our training environment, but there's still, we got all that information. We know what's going on. There's still live intelligence data that we're manning and working. And even though we're training, there are areas that the guys and the non-coms working for me that were back from Vietnam are always keeping their nose into it. And that's why, as an officer, I always surround myself with good non-commissioned officers. They saved my butt many times. But in October '72, I was going to become part of the 7th Radio Research Group. And they used to do that. You couldn't say Army Security Agency, okay, that means NSA related. You're going, because even on your personnel orders, they don't want that kind of intelligence information going out anywhere. So they give you 6 months to prepare. And those 6 months, it was, okay, here's where you're going. And of course, it stresses the family out, because I had a report date of 1 April of '73. And so for 2 or 3 months, I'm going through the process, and then a miraculous thing happened. And for those of us that have been around and older, ongoing at the time was something called a Paris Peace Accords discussion was taking place, where Henry Kissinger was dealing with representatives from North Vietnam to see how we could come to some sort of solution.
And back away.
And the peace accords were signed in January of 1973. And then I got the best Christmas gift ever. They canceled all our orders. And
keep your butt home.
I never went over. So you have your bags packed, and then you unpack your bags. And I have some friends that will say, geez, I was trained and I didn't have the opportunity to use the skills to go to Vietnam. I never regret ever going to Vietnam, because I did lose friends in Vietnam that I trained with. And if anybody thinks war is glorious, and I'm usually behind the camera, anybody that sits out here, it's not.
It never was.
And you were in hard combat in the Pacific Campaign. We've had a lot of World War II veterans here, Vietnam in-country guys that have been there under fire, have been there. And for the Vietnam veteran who was there, in era veterans and how we were treated, that little story, there was no respect. Nobody knew what post-stress, a PTS, post-traumatic stress disorder was. PTSD was. We've seen some of those guys here, okay, they might be sheltered. And the disrespect was horrible. It was just horrible. So when I was getting out, needless to say, and I got out of, because you asked me, I went active for December '73, and I got out 4 December '69, and got out 30 November of '73. Okay. And just before I was getting out, I got orders for Korea, but because and it's happening now with the Gulf and Afghanistan, not the Gulf War, but Iraq and Afghanistan, they're downsizing. Sometimes that term that military guys know, they're rifting. In other words, telling people we don't need forces, reduction in forces. And that's what was happening. And when I got my orders for Korea, what I was doing in the meantime, because they said, go look for a civilian job if you want to get out. And I said, I do. And I was able to get a job with IBM. And I said, see, I got a job. And they went, okay. So they canceled those orders because I had a job waiting for me.
Wonderful. Yeah. Now, how about the transition, if you will, from that tends to working with IBM and wherever else you've gone. How did you talk about that?
And that is a great story. I will add, because I know how you ask some of the questions. How do you? It's first of all, how did I get to IBM? Remember, I mentioned I was a political science. I mean, a history major, political science minor. How do I go working for a company called IBM? Computers, mid-range computer systems, office products division, big companies, you have to come out of, they just don't hire anyone because somebody knows somebody, et cetera, et cetera. It's like I've never had IBM, and it's part of any goal that I was thinking about career-wise. I heard and found out, and yes, my brother-in-law worked for IBM, and he called me up and just said, hey, I know you're thinking about getting out, but IBM is hiring veteran officers. And I said, great. So I, was getting out, and of course I come in, my first time, I don't think I had my uniform on. But I had my interview, and he was asking me some of the questions you're already asking me, and he says, well, I really appreciate it. It's the first time I heard, well, I really appreciate what you veterans have done during a difficult period. I'm going like, and he says, and we'd like to hire you. I would not have gotten my close to 20-year career with IBM unless I had become an officer in the United States Army. And remember that decision I had to make.
Yeah, it paid off.
And my parents, my wife at the time, my friends, you're making a terrible mistake. Took a chance. I was headed to Vietnam, and I would have served proudly over there. But things happened the way they did. The transition was probably a little more difficult for me, even though I wasn't in country. But you're in a regimented environment. You are the United States Army, you're an officer, everything is structured, everything is controlled in terms of the way you operate, standard operating procedures, everything is more rigid, okay? And I had a love for the military, and it was kind of like, should I make this a career or shouldn't I make it a career? And if I wasn't married, I might have stayed in because I enjoyed it. And I would have continued to do what I had to do and go wherever I had to go. But I can remember when I worked for IBM out of Worcester, one of the things that they did is they said, great, we want you because we cover Fort Devens. So I knew a lot of the, I knew a lot of the companies.
Background.
And they said, okay, this will work. And it did work. But going back, and it was almost a little depressing that I was like, I'm not part of the team anymore. I couldn't get into the officers club like I used to be able to unless I was escort. I mean, it was just something like a void was missing. And there were times where, am I making the right decision? Did I do the right thing? But you adjust, and certainly it turned out that it was, you get through that 1 year of 4 years of being in a military environment, and IBM, not military, but still structured somewhat.
Well structured.
It made the transition a little bit easy, but I still missed it. So what happened was I ran into a friend of mine who was a company commander at Fort Devens for a ASA electronic warfare company. It was a tactical company, and he needed an executive officer. And I was the first lieutenant at the time, but I was in the inactive reserve, and he said, I could really use you. So that was probably a year after I get out. So it was at Fort Devens. I was living in Leominster, Mass., and I said, why not? And
veteran community.
Yeah, and so from there that's when we worked we were working out of Fort Drum. We did work some live missions. Everything was Cold War oriented at that time in the late 70s and early 80s. One of the challenges that we didn't have, good news, bad news, trying to keep the unit that we had, some of the guys that were in that unit were reservists, just somehow, didn't want to be there, but had a 6-year obligation. They got out of going to Vietnam, and it was making sure these guys showed up, looked like troops for the weekend, and performed. The biggest challenge that you had was keeping the guys motivated that this was a mission, and you keep training and training and training. And I look back in retrospect, is like when you're in the reserve unit or the National Guard, unlike what's happening today, where these guys are going over the country constantly, these guys that we had in that period of time didn't have a particular message, a mission, and trying to keep them motivated. It's like guys saying, okay, how much we want to train? We want to see something, and they would start losing interest.
Yeah.
So that was our biggest challenge. So there was some discipline. Sometimes that was our biggest challenge. We had an aviation company, electronic aviation unit. And the rest was, again, as I mentioned to you, in some of the training, manual Morse operators, linguists, and of course traffic analysts. So, and we were always, mobile. So we'd do our 2 weeks up at Dromore. We'd go down to Fort Eglin. We were in a big, I can still remember working with the 24th Mech unit. It was great. That's an active unit that we were part of, a big, huge training exercise, and that was always good to be in the field. And I was for the division commander, I was the intelligence briefer for them. So I was actually the briefer, getting all the information, working the map boards with those guys, and it was kind of thrilling. It would take me out of my IBM days.
Oh,
and then I would, so it was kind of like, okay, I'm glad we're not in a real active, live, in-country war mission, but you simulate it as much as you can and say, okay, now I feel like I have purpose.
Let me interrupt a second.
Yeah.
You just hit a note. Do you know a guy named Gary Backus?
I do. Gary, we had him here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was in Grenada.
A linguist.
Yeah, yeah. I was doing.
You were using the same words in my little computer. It doesn't have too much up there, but there's all kinds of, hey, we have a match.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And what happened as time evolved, and we were constantly trying to bring troops in or trying to convince the reservists to remain, and at the time, we were part of the 94th ARCOM, Army Command, and we were reservists and reported through the 26th Yankee Division, which were Guard people, and at that time, Guard and reservists didn't necessarily get along. For whatever reason, I have no idea.
I interviewed a couple of 26s.
Yeah. So because we were called RAs. We were all regular Army guys. And NGs, or National Guard guys, were, unlike what they are now, which are just as they're wearing a lot of combat infantry badges. When did you see my time, a National Guard guy wearing a CIB badge?
Some of them 3 and 4 tours.
Yeah, and they have it just as tough and as rough as any regular active guy, and maybe even more. At that time, we can still remember when I was in basic, regular Army over here, NG over here. So they were like separating. Yeah. There was always that distance. So when we were doing a lot of our reserve training and supporting the Yankee Division, there wasn't any love lost between the NG guys and the RAs at the time. As time progressed, I eventually became the company commander, and I did that for 2 years, felt great. And I had to make a decision because I was moving up in my career with IBM. And here I was, the company commander.
Are you a major by now?
Not a major, but I was on the major list.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And what happened is we were growing the unit. And as the Gulf War was, things were in the Middle East were kind of, we could see things stirring up a little bit at the time. And actually, I'm probably premature in that. That happened back in 1991. So there's things that we knew that were going on. Not that we saw anything happening.
No, but you had that itch.
But, yeah. And so what happened is they started authorizing some additional full-time active people for our reserve unit. And I actually had a full-time active military officer, captain, that reported to me because I was a company commander. So I'm a part-time company commander. And I have also a non-com that was full-time. And then I had also 2 full-time civilians. So now I have 2 active duty military personnel, 2 full-time GS, government services representative there, 4 people. And I'm working for IBM, and I'm a part-time captain. If anybody thinks that reserve or guard units are just 1 week in a month and 2 weeks in the summer, they're wrong.
There's a lot of week.
For your field first, your first shirts, your higher level E7 and above, they're working every weekend. They say the meeting for the flag, you're not getting paid. And I was there every other weekend, sometimes every weekend. And my wife Libby now, and it's my second wife for the last 35 years, she was getting, you know, where's the family life?
Yeah.
What's going
What about
on?
me?
And I just said, you know, this is
Yeah.
what I'm doing. What changed is when you get promoted to major, you have to look for a different station because they call it billeting. You can't say I want to be here as a major because the billet slot is for a 03 captain, and I had been promoted to captain at the time, as I said. So when I went and became a major, I had to look for a home.
Yeah, disenfranchised.
But in the meantime, I was moving up in the ranks, and now I'm offered a position as a manager, you know, getting there with IBM, and I was on the marketing staff, and it's like, where am I going to put so I don't have a station to go to as a major. I think Hanscom Air Force Base, the 94th ARCOM headquarters was there, and I'm living in Westboro, so do I haul all the way down there? Do I stay? And it was kind of like, you know, I'm making it big. Seems like I'm moving up into management with IBM. I'm going to stay there. And so I resigned and got out. I look at it, I'd say 4 years active, 10 years of active reserve. Gee, there's 14 years. You say 6 years if I had stayed in.
Yeah.
The wouldas, the couldas, and shouldas. But you balance out where you're in life and where you are at that time. And at that time, I had to do what I had to do. So
Well,
there's no.
you have to evaluate what your obligations are too.
Yep. So no regrets whatsoever.
Now, how'd you come here? I'm just watching the clock. You got a couple of minutes to go. How come you're here? What made that change?
Good timing, you know, to be here at Bedford Community Television. That will take another hour. I just found my way here after I left IBM because we were downsizing, and one of the companies, in my last year as a manager there, I had companies that I was working with that had kept offering me jobs. We were outsourcing a lot of it, and one of the companies right here from Bedford made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and I knew we were downsizing. And IBM at the time was just like the Army. Hey, if you want to leave, you know, we will give you a year's worth of salary, etc. And we had already gone through 3 downsizing, and I was part of some of that downsizing management aspect of it, moving people. Not that I was moving people, but part of the input. So then they were downsizing again. So I said, you know, I may want to take one of these offers, and that's how I ended up. So I was with a consulting company, and I'm conscious of the time too. And I was there for 4 years, and then independently invested in a couple of other things. And I started this as a hobby back in 1998 with a bunch of guys. And then when the consultant or the person they were using to run the station left, the board came to me and said, how would you like to do this? And that was in 2000, late 99, 2000, and then grew the station and hired Colleen, and from there the place has grown.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, your
welcome.
service, and the interview.
Thank you.
Do I have time to wrap it up?
You sure do. Go ahead.
Okay, folks, that was a well-spent hour, I think. We've been working on it for quite a while. But if any of you out there have the desire to share your experiences with us, please come and get us the information on how to get here and be back in the program. It'll be perhaps one of the best times you'll have. We've had some fun. Some are good, some are bad. But the important thing is, if you don't tell your story, nobody else will. And we've lost all that history. Now, we talk about the right of people to complain and so forth that some of us have gone through to make that possible for them. But it's everybody's obligation, I think, to really think what you want to do. But more important, you've got to be responsible and responsive to that decision. If you have any stories, give me a call. Name is Bob Stevens. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.